Today we're going to be creating a decimal operations foldable. So we're going to use the same shutter fold that we used for our multiplying and dividing fractions foldable. So just to remind you really quickly, when we made that foldable, we folded the paper in half horizontally, and then we opened it up and we folded it in half vertically. So you can do it another way. You could also fold it in half horizontally and then fold it down. That's going to give you your fourths. Then once we had it open, we folded in the shutters, and that created our shutter fold. Now here's the layout that it should look like. In the front, you need to put your two lines on your folds in the front, and then it's going to be adding decimals, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing decimals. So that's what the title page looks like. Then when you open it, we have a lot going on. What I started with was the big plus sign. So I did a big line down the middle, vertically, and I did a big line over horizontally. Then I added find the sum, find the difference, find the product, and find the quotient. I added a line under that, and then on the fold, I put a line down to the next title. So that is what you're looking at. Go ahead and get that created. Pause the video to create it, and then we will move on. So next, let's talk about the front. We'll start with adding and subtracting decimals. We're going to go through this pretty quickly because we have hit it in class. I just want you to have a place to reference if you need to remind yourself what to do. So adding and subtracting decimals follow the same rules. So here's the rules that we will follow for adding and subtracting decimals. Number one, you will line up the decimals. So on the front of this foldable is where our rules will be. Line up your decimals. And I'm just going to save the decimals. When I say line up the decimals, that means every place value should be in line with the same place value from the other number. Number two, use placeholder zeros. Or I'll write use zeros as placeholders. That is extremely important for subtraction, especially on the top number. But it's also good for addition. We'll look at that. And then lastly, number three, we have add or subtract, then bring down the decimal. So once you have them lined up and you've added your zeros, you just add or subtract the decimals, then bring down the decimal. So these all go together. Adding and subtracting decimals, you line up the decimals, you use placeholder zeros, you add or subtract, and then bring down the decimal. So let's do a couple of examples. If you haven't already, and I haven't explained this, you do need to cut along this line so that you have a good shutter flap, or 4 shutter flaps. So I'm going to go ahead and make a cut on the line in the front. I'm not cutting through, just like last time we did with multiplying and dividing. And I'm going to cut on this side as well. So we have our nice fold. And right now I'm just going to be working in adding decimals. So when I open that up, it should say find the sum, which is your solution to an addition problem. And we're going to be doing this with decimals. A lot of times when we're given a problem, it's going to look like kind of how I've been showing you in class. So it'll be 56 2/10 plus 4 19/100. Our first rule from the front is line up your decimals. So we want to make sure that we do that. So I'm going to rewrite this as we would do a normal addition problem, 56 2/10. But now I need to make sure that decimal's lined up. I usually start by just putting that decimal there. And then this 4 is in the ones place and 6 is in the ones place, so they should be in the same place value. This 1 is in the 10th place, this 2 is in the 10th place, so those should be lined up, and then my 9 goes off to the side. And this will be my addition problem. Now, as you can see, I do have this random space here. For addition, it is not 100% necessary, but you might want to put a placeholder 0. I would just do it. We'll call that placeholder 0. And then you might also want to make yourself a note that you lined up the decimals. Remember, this is a place to go back if you get to a problem and you're like, I totally forgot how to do this. This tells you every step of the way, so make sure that you're definitely leaving yourself little notes. You obviously wouldn't do this on every single problem. Then all you have to do is add this and you are good to go. So 9 plus 0 is 9. We got 3. Bring that decimal down because if you don't have it, the whole thing doesn't make sense. We got 10 and 6. All right, you probably want to leave yourself a note just so that you're constantly thinking back to it. Don't forget your decimal. So don't forget that decimal. 6,039 is totally different than 60. Okay, let's do one more example quickly. So I'm going to find the sum of 975 thousandths and 3 8/10. And I'm going to throw in another number. So let's say if there were 3 numbers, what we would do. So we're also going to add 2 56 hundredths. So this is definitely something that you could see. I'm going to line up those decimals. I have 3 numbers. I'm going to go ahead and put 3 decimals. I know they have to be lined up, so that's where I'm going to start. So the first one I have 0 and 975 thousandths. Then I have 3 and 8/10. All my tenths need to be lined up. All my ones need to be lined up. 2 and 56 hundredths. Now, I don't want to get lost in these numbers and where their place values are. So I'm going to go ahead and say if my top number is to the thousandths, I'm going to make all of these go to the thousandths so I can stay lined up. And then you just need to add it and bring that decimal down. So this is going to be 5, 3, 3. Bring that decimal down, and because you borrowed that one, that's a 7. And that is your answer. Get caught up. Feel free to pause, but try to go as quickly as possible. Let's go to subtraction. So I'm going to close that flap and open up my find the difference. Difference is when you're finding a solution to a subtraction problem. In this case, we're looking for decimals. So something they love to give you is a whole number, something like 25. And then you're going to get rid of 89 hundredths. So this is basically like $25 and I'm getting rid of 89 cents. So the way you would have to do this is line that up. So if I have $25, there's no decimal. But every number in the world actually has a decimal that's not showing. But if we have a whole number, there's no need to show that decimal. But if this was $25, then you know there's a decimal there. And now we need to line everything up. If this is the ones place and this is the ones place, then you know that 0 has to go under the 5, and we needed to make that decimal lined up anyways. And the 89 hundredths go off to the side. And that is how you would line this up. The problem is you have to have placeholder zeros here. You can't take 89 cents away from no cents. It doesn't make sense. I don't have anything. It doesn't make sense. That's pretty funny. Okay, I don't have anything to get rid of. So I have to put something there for me to be able to get rid of. So I'm going to do these placeholder zeros. There are my placeholder zeros, and now I can actually subtract. So it really is impossible to do if you don't have those placeholder zeros, unlike addition. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my borrowing. I can't subtract 9 from nothing, so I'm going to have to borrow. I can't borrow, so I'm going to borrow from the 5, make that a 4, make it nice and neat so that you don't get lost in there. Anything with the slash becomes a 9 because I tried to borrow from it, and then we have 10. 10 minus 9 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. Bring that decimal down so we don't forget. 4 minus 0 is 4, and then we have 2. So my answer is 24 and 11 hundredths. Let's do one more example. In this one, we're going to be taking away 2 numbers, just kind of like we did on that addition one. So I'm going to have 10 minus 2 and 39 hundredths, and then I'm going to take away 4 and 1/10 from that. Unlike addition, I can't take all these away at one time, so you have to start at the front. I first have to take 2 and 39 hundredths away from 10. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. I have 10 minus 2, because that's my whole number, and 39 hundredths. I have to line those decimals up. So I have to put my placeholder zeros here in order to be able to actually do this. So I'm going to go ahead and show my borrowing. They love doing this because they want to know, do you know how to borrow? So just get used to it. You're going to see it a lot. So that 1 becomes a 0. I have 9, 9, and 10. So 10 minus 9 is 1. I'm left with 6. Bring that 0 down. I have 7. And 0 minus nothing is 0. So far, this is what I have. But I still have to take away the 4 and 1/10. So now I can bring that down here. I have my first difference, but I need to complete that. So the 4 is in the 1's place. That needs to go into the 7. And then the 1 goes under the 6 because that's 6/10. I'm going to take this away. You can also rewrite it somewhere else if you like, but I don't know why you would need to. This placeholder 0 is not 100% necessary, but if you want to, just to stay lined up, it is a good idea to place a 0 there. And I do it dots just to show you that it wasn't originally there, but I would normally just draw that in. And then you will subtract again. This one's a little kinder to us because we don't have so much borrowing. 1 minus 0 is 1. We have 5. Bring that decimal down and we're left with 3. So your ultimate solution or ultimate difference here is 3 and 51/100ths. So that is what your foldable should look like on the top. Make sure you get that completed, and then we're gonna move on to products and quotients. So let's go ahead and close that. Again, you pause where you need to, but you don't need to take a ton of time on these. Let's move on to products. So products was one of the things when I did this warm-up for the first time, y'all were like, I forgot how to do that. What do I need to do for products? So let's make sure we have a good foldable to find that. You might have something like this, 2/10 times 6/10. Now, a lot of you are like, you've been telling us to use the dot. If I used a dot here, could that be confusing with these decimals? Yes, so there is a right place for a dot and a right place for a multiplication sign. So in this case, I'm just gonna use this multiplication sign. If this is what I'm looking for, these are my factors to make my product, I need to go ahead and multiply these. So this is gonna look like I'm lining up these decimals. I'm not lining these decimals up, they just happen to be in line because they are at the same place. So remember, and you might wanna make a note to yourself. Do not need to line up decimals. I guess it would have been a good idea if we put the rules on the front, wouldn't it have? So let's before we actually multiply this out, let's put some rules on the front, multiplying decimals. So number 1, you just multiply. As if there are no decimals. Multiply as if there are no decimals. Do not let those decimals freak you out. It is not addition and subtraction. You don't have to line them up. The place values don't matter. At this point, you are just multiplying. Number 2, the decimal point in the answer will have as many decimal places as the 2 original numbers combined. So that's a little wordy, but we will talk about it. The decimal point in the answer will have as many decimal places as the 2, I'm running out of space, y'all. As the 2 original numbers combined. I'm gonna use my little number symbol. Hashtag combined. No, that's a number symbol, I'm just playing. Okay, so we kind of talked about this. This means you count the numbers behind the place value, behind the decimal in your originals, and then you find out where that is. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply these numbers. 6 times 2 is 12. Since these are zeros, you really don't have to borrow that, but I'm just going to show it to you. 6 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. So I really, since these are zeros, could have just brought down the 12. And I don't have to do 0 times 2, 0 times 0. Those are just zeros. It doesn't do anything for me. Now I need to count the numbers behind the decimals. I have 2 numbers behind the decimal. So like we've talked about in class, I'm going to come up 2 numbers in my product, and that is where my decimal needs to go. All right, so make yourself a note so that you have it. There are 2 numbers. So I have 2 numbers behind my decimal in my factors. So in my product, I need to move 2 places forward. I know most of you are like, I already know this, I know how to do this. But if you get confused and you forget, this is where you can go back. So it's okay if you already know it, just write it. These are your ultimate notes. So next year when you go back to this and you're like, I haven't done this in a year, this is a good place that you can actually see exactly what to do. So we're gonna do a little bit bigger problem this time. Let's say we have 3 and 25/100ths, and we are going to multiply that times 4 and 8/10. Really challenge yourself to be saying your decimals in the proper terms. So that you guys can get used to that, changing a decimal to a fraction. You have to read it, write it, reduce it. If you can't read it, you can't do it. So let's take a look at how we would do this. Should we line these decimals up? No. So I'm really just going to write 3 and 25/100ths, and I'm just going to put the 4 and 8/10 underneath that, like this. It doesn't have to be lined up. Could I? Yes, because that would still be equivalent, but now you have an extra 0. It's more work. There's no need to do it. And I'm going to multiply this out. So I have 5 times 8 is 40, 16, so that's going to be 20, 24, 26. So your first line should say 2600. Notice I'm not even looking at the decimals. I am just multiplying as if there are not decimals. Next, if you want, you can put that placeholder 0 there. It's not necessary, but you need to get rid of the numbers you borrowed previously so that you don't make a silly mistake and use them again. 4 times 5 is 20. So instead of using a 4 on accident, I'm going to use that 2. I have 8, that's 10, 12, 13. So notice my work is very lined up. We got to stay lined up so our place values are all in the right place. Add that up, you got 0, 0, 6, 5, 1. So 15,600. But that doesn't make sense because if I were to estimate these up here, this is going to be 3. So let's look at that because we want to make sure that we are always thinking about reasonableness. If this is 3, doesn't that estimate to 3? And look, this 8 makes 4 go up, so this is estimated to 5. So my answer should be somewhere around 15. 15,000 doesn't make sense. So let's see what we need to do. If I have up here, I have 1, 2, 3 numbers behind decimals in my factors. So in my product, 1, 2, 3, I have to go up 3 numbers, and that's where my decimal goes. My estimation was 15. My answer is 15 and 6/10, or 600 thousandths, or 60 hundredths. They're all the same, but that is definitely reasonable. So most of the time, this answer would be 15 and 6/10 because those zeros don't matter as much. And then, of course, I didn't box this one, so let's get that boxed. Another way to look at that is sometimes they do put a 0 in the front. You can if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. So there are products, and we are going to end with division. Division does have kind of a lengthy explanation, so bear with me as we write these rules, but they are good ones. So you're going to have to write a little smaller than what you did for multiplication. Let's check out our division rules. Number 1, I'm going to write pretty small here. If the divisor is not a whole number, move the decimal point to the right to make it a whole number. If the divisor is not a whole number, comma, move the decimal to the right to make it a whole number. So if the divisor is not a whole number, it has to be. We are dividing by a whole number. You move the decimal to the right to make it a whole number. Number 2. Now you need to move the decimal in the dividend the same number of places. That is when you have a decimal in the divisor. You cannot have a decimal in the divisor. We have to make that a whole number. Whatever you do to the divisor, you must do to the dividend. Exactly the same thing. You don't make the dividend a whole number if that's not what needs to happen. You just move it the exact same amount of times. After you've done that, and this is what also happens if you don't have a decimal in the divisor, you will just divide like normal. And I kind of do number 3 and 4 together. Number 4, you are going to put the decimal directly above the decimal point in the dividend. Put the decimal directly above the decimal in the dividend. Okay, I told y'all that was a lot, so that is a lot. So get that written down. Main points here. If there's a decimal in the divisor, you can't have it. It has to be a whole number. You're going to move the decimal in the dividend the same way you did here. If you already have a whole number, then you'll just start here. Divide like you normally would, and wherever the decimal is, you put that directly above. So let's do some examples. And then we are done with this beautiful foldable. Find the quotient. So let's start with 1 38/100 divided by 0 6/100. So I'm going to do 2 examples with decimals in the divisor so that you can see what that looks like. If I'm gonna do this, you have to remember when it's written like this, you have to think about what these are. 1 38/100 is being divided by 6/100. So this is your dividend, and this is your divisor. So the way that looks is, if that's my divisor, I'm going to do 1 38/100 divided by 6/100. Now, I cannot have a decimal in my divisor. That needs to be a whole number. So I am going to, and the rule really is that you're multiplying by 10 every time you move. I'm going to multiply this times 10. Not enough. It's not a whole number yet, so I'm going to multiply it by 100. If you were to multiply 6/100 by 100, you would get the whole number 6. I like to X out this decimal so I don't accidentally think that that's still there. Whatever I do to my divisor, I must do to my dividend. So I'm going to move this decimal and multiply it also by 100 by moving that decimal twice to the right. So I have moved both of these decimals twice to the right to make those whole numbers. Now I can just divide. Now this is kind of a mess. Some students like to rewrite it. I will rewrite it for you just to see if that's something that you like to do. So now really all I'm looking at is 138 divided by 6. That decimal's now at the end here. This decimal's at the end, so I don't even have a decimal at this point in this. I don't need it. So if you think it's nicer to rewrite it so you can see it a little better, that's fine, do it. 6 doesn't go into 1, right? So 6 goes into 13 twice. That's 12. I'm left with 1, bring that 8 down. 6 goes into 18 3 times, and I don't need a decimal because in this point, 3 times 6 is 18, and I'm done with my division. So I have a beautiful number. My answer is 23, and there didn't need to be a decimal in that one. So a lot of times that will happen. Let's do one more example. So let's say it's 42 3/10 divided by 1 2/10. So I know that I'm going to do 42 3/10 divided by 1 2/10. I cannot have a decimal in my divisor, so I will move that times 10. That means that now I have 12 instead of 1 2/10. And if I multiply my divisor by 10, I must multiply my dividend by 10. And now I have a new decimal. I'm going to bring that decimal straight up so I don't forget where it goes. And I'm not going to rewrite this one. If you want to rewrite it, go for it. All right, 12 goes into 42 3 times. It didn't go into 4. You're welcome to put a 0 there. 3 times 12 is 36. And I'm left with 6. I bring down that 3. Now, 12 goes into 63, and I'm still in front of my decimal. So 12 goes into 63 5 times. 5 times 12 is 60, and I'm still left with a remainder. So in this case, I'm not done. I can't just pull up my 3 as my decimal point, and that's something some students do. You don't ever pull up a remainder and put it in your quotient. So we talked about this yesterday. What you can do is you can add these zeros here. As long as this stays 423 and you have a decimal to prove that's 423, we can bring these zeros down. So now I have 30, which 12 does go into. 12 goes into 30 twice. 2 times 12 is 24. I know this is kind of a big one, y'all. And that is going to be 6. I still have a remainder here. So I need to add another 0. Remember, in 6th grade, 7th grade now, we don't do remainders anymore. So we make decimals or we make fractions. In this case, 12 goes into 60 5 times. That is 60. And now I am done. So remember, if you need to continue building your decimal, you can do that by adding these placeholder zeros. We're going to make a few notes here, just so that you have them in case you need them. So just a reminder right here, what we did was you must make the divisor a whole number. You must make the divisor a whole number. What you do to the divisor, you must do to the dividend. Oh man, so I kind of got in there, but that's okay. So that is the end of our beautiful foldable. Hopefully this is helpful, and if you have any questions or you're confused about something, you come get me, ask me. I am happy to help you understand it better, but that is what it should look like. Hopefully you can see that you now have a wealth of information about decimals. Your inside is beautiful and organized, hopefully, and we're ready to move on with learning more about decimals. Bye.